Hello, my name is Haley Engel, and this video is for my Sociology class Module 8 assignment, which asks us to make a video answering the question prompts. The first question states, society has changed over the past decade from style to language and even our environmental resources. Given an example of how social change has affected the physical environment, population, innovation, diffusion, and mass media. So the textbook we've been using for this course, Sociology in the Core, the 11th edition, written by Michael Hughes and Carolyn Kohler, defines social change as changes in the areas of pattern or culture, structure, and social behavior over time. In regards to change of the physical environment, with the creation of genetically modified organisms, we've been able to feed an ever-growing population on less and less land every year because of these new developments in the area of agriculture. It's a change in the physical environment because we are learning to grow food on land that is might not be suitable for crop production, and it allows us to be able to work through droughts and work through different changes in the environment that might be experienced that highly affect farmers and agriculturalists. An example of change pertaining to population, there has been a decrease in the death rate and increase in the age of that people are living to. And this is greatly due to advances in modern medicine to treat diseases. So our population is continuing to grow because of those changes. An example of innovation would also be the advances in modern medicine as well, but self-driving cars, the invention of drones, electric cars, the ability to use gas less with these electric cars that have a more positive impact on the environment. An example of diffusion would be the integration of other cultures into our society and our own culture today. And a great way that we see that is through different foods that are introduced, different fashion trends, different family traditions. And as we continue to merge our different cultures and societies, we are continuing to push along and change our own society and our own culture because it is continuously being infused with new cultures and new perspectives. An example of mass media actually is diffusion is somewhat fueled by the mass media as well. Mass media has greatly changed society in the way that we are given the news. Generally, there's quite a repetition of the same stories, not only just throughout the news hour, but throughout the next couple days of when a story is released, or the next couple weeks, depending on how much information is continuing to come out about a topic. Generally, if you watch the first 10 minutes of the news, they'll show you everything that's going to be covered within that hour. And if you keep that channel on, you're basically just going to keep hearing the same thing over and over again. This can be both positive and negative. There are a lot of things that are beneficial to the news these days. Example being in Arizona, the 3 on Your Side helps citizens when they have an issue that can't be resolved by reaching out to a company that they feel has wronged them. And the news has attempted in a way to reach out and help citizens. It can also have a negative impact regarding different situations that occur, especially pertaining ones that are tragic events that happen within our communities and can sometimes tend to produce and promote mass hysteria and panic among populations. The second question prompt is, information revolution was and still is an important perspective in social change. In your opinion, how has it changed society? And how do you feel it will change society in the future? People now have the ability to have multiple forms of technology at their fingertips that are available to them, and it can have a very positive impact if it's used correctly. If not, it can lead to widespread information that is incorrect, and a lot of people have a lack of media awareness or the desire to research and see if some of these concepts that are being shared are actually true. And in most cases, they're not. So there is a widespread misinformation, and people are very misguided in that, and they are very apt to take whatever they are spoon-fed and believe it and just take it as truth instead of taking a second to say, this doesn't exactly sound logical. Maybe I should do some research behind this. However, it does create also a lack of skillful and meaningful conversation and connection with other people, because people are so reliant on their phones and texting and not having to have a true personal connection, that they are losing valuable skills that we as society should possess in order to continue to socialize with one another. It can create social awkwardness when trying to have conversations. The way that a lot of the youth now use text lingo, even when they're talking or in their school papers. And it also has increased the amount of bullying that we see with the example of cyberbullying, because there are many people that feel they can get behind a screen and say whatever they feel without experiencing the repercussions of what they are doing. The third prompt is, how has modernization changed many underdeveloped nations? Modernization has really allowed members of society to have a place in competition as far as the global economy goes. And it also has brought education to those who necessarily didn't have access to it before, access to healthcare, other technologies which benefit societies as a whole. It really allows for change in these areas where it was once non-existent, that they just didn't have access to it. And that has been a very positive influence for that change. The last prompt is, what are the types of social movements that have occurred in history? When and why did they occur? And again, referring to our textbook, the authors Carolyn Hughes and Michael Kohler define a social movement as a more or less persistent and organized effort on the part of a relatively large number of people to bring about or resist change. So one example, there are 4 types of these movements, and the first one is revolutionary, and that is where there is a desire to change and completely replace the existing scheme of values. And one example of that is the Russian Revolution that began with the abolishment of the monarchy in 1917, and it ended in 1923 with the establishment of the Soviet Union. And the next example is a reformative movement, which is more aimed so at creating change that takes an existing scheme of values and hopes to make them work more adequately or more among more people. And a good example of that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement really pushed for equality among race and really taking the values that currently existed for other members of society and spreading that into to African Americans as well. And that began from 1948 and is still actually ongoing today. There's still a lot of change that needs to happen, and there's still a lot of fight for civil rights. The last example, or another example, excuse me, is resistance movements. Resistance movements aim more so to change something that's previously been instituted, or to block the change of something that's previously been instituted. A good example of this is the movement for LGBTQ rights. It began in the 1940s in LA, and it really began because of homophobia and transphobia. And it still is also ongoing today, continuing to fight for the rights of those who may differ than us, or have different, or differ from others, or who have different views, but really just still fighting for the rights of each and every human being and individual. The last example is expressive movements. Those are more concerned with change for within people, and less concerned with the change of like government or law. Not in all cases, however. And a good example of this would be Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which actually started September 5th of 1980. Because a woman named Candace Leitner, her 13-year-old daughter, was killed by a drunk driver. And so that's where that initiative, that nonprofit, stems from. And it is an example of an expressive movement that there should be better law against drunk driving, and the push to educate about not making the choice to drink and drive, or to get someone who is a designated driver, or a cab, or call a friend. And that's an example of an expressive movement. Thank you.